Hi, this is Tom O'Connor, and I'm here today with Craig Ball. We've been asked by a new software company, an up-and-coming software company called Social Evidence, to discuss, for a few minutes at least, social media and its role in evidence in the eDiscovery world, and sort of what's going on there, what tools are being used, how social media impacts the e-discovery world. I think it's safe to say, Craig, that obviously social media is evidence if we're talking about things such as web pages or Facebook pages or blogs, or I even include, although some people would disagree with me, text messaging under that, because it's often using some sort of internet connectivity. But however you define it, or whatever subcategories you have of it, it certainly has exploded and so shows no signs of slowing down. Would you agree?
I agree. It shows no signs of slowing down, and more to the point of being evidence, it's potential evidence. And even before we have the chance to assess it for its relevance, we have an obligation to preserve it so that we have the ability to determine if it might be evidence.
So really, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Pardon me, I was slow thinking there. I have to take issue. I don't tend to lump SMS messaging in the context of social. I mean, obviously you can have a setting where a lot of people are using a messaging format for a social interaction, but I don't want messaging to get lumped in with social media, because I can see people abusing the idea that that doesn't have to be preserved because it's more like your Facebook page. No, I think actually messaging increasingly has supplanted email as the application of choice for one-on-one communication. So I think it needs to be treated with all the care and relevance we would have historically given to email, and not lump it into the kind of social networking, MySpace kind of idea.
Well, a month ago, I think I would have agreed with you wholeheartedly. I think I was with you on a business trip. Perhaps it was at ILTA when my cell phone died on me, and the wonderful folks at AT&T were incapable of delivering one to me at my hotel location within 5 business days. But that's a different story.
Right.
And I was quite surprised to see the wealth of text messages that were available on social media sites. I ended up using my Facebook site to message half a dozen different people who also had Facebook accounts.
Sure.
So the bleeding or the blurring of the lines there, it seemed to me, are maybe it isn't there yet, but it certainly seems to me that it's coming. So it's of no great import, I think, for this discussion. But I am told, and when I brought this up with some of the forensics guys at our shop, I was told that in other parts of the world, Facebook texting is the preferred medium for texting, simply because of lack of SMS services. Have you heard anything to that effect?
Well, I would say that certainly there are alternatives outside of the United States that are much more popular than the traditional messaging we use with our phones.
Yeah.
WhatsApp is one that comes to mind as in huge use worldwide, and yet it tends to often be overlooked in the United States.
Okay.
But let me go back to one point, Tom. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but the fact that Facebook has a popular messaging app speaks to me more about the necessity of preserving Facebook and considering Facebook for preservation with greater urgency than it's historically been given. We have to treat it, as I say, more like we would email. So it doesn't, to me, it doesn't tend to make the messaging aspects of Facebook a social networking application. I think it actually pulls the social networking application closer into the fold.
The other direction.
Deal with. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, either way, we're really interested in how do we collect these things? I think we're both in agreement. The need for preservation is there. How do we preserve and collect social media today? Are there any agreed upon methods or tools that are out there? I know of one or two, but you, of course, being a forensic specialist, have a lot more experience here. X1 is the tool that I know of, as well as some of the self-collection features in some of the programs. Anything else out there that is being used these days?
Yes, there are some rather, it's kind of interesting. The social networking preservation business has gone in the opposite direction of the rest of the eDiscovery business. In eDiscovery, generally, we've seen a lot of consolidation as companies are gobbling up companies, presumably because there's gold in them, their hills. But it's been the opposite with regard to social networking preservation. 5 years ago, you had a wide range of virtualized and behind the firewall standalone tools that you could use to try to collect Facebook content, tweets, and so forth. Today, the market has dwindled to almost none. You mentioned X1 Social Discovery. That certainly will be the existing tool that will come to mind, probably the largest installed user base, and even that is not a very large installed user base, I suspect. But no, what is really being used, Tom, is kind of abysmal. Mostly screenshots. And of course, screenshots are not going to be searchable. They're going to leave data behind. They have nothing in terms of the API information, the sort of underneath the page information. Hard to authenticate. And you know, when you're doing a screenshot of something like Facebook, if you don't work very, very hard to expose all the content, to open all the links, show all the comments, you know, reveal the likes and so forth, a lot of what we consider the heart and soul of social networking is concealed from taking a screenshot.
Right. So in addition, that seems like a very tedious process, screenshots.
Beyond tedious, but you know, the people doing it are often being paid by the hour, so you don't tend to hear the complaints that you might. It's a terrible process, and it's almost always going to fail in certain respects when we consider the volume. And let's consider that volume for a minute. You know, the average person who uses Facebook visits Facebook 14 times a day. Now, I haven't been there today. You probably haven't been there today. Have you been there today?
I'm not telling.
Okay, well, let's assume you haven't. That means that for me at least, because I didn't go, somebody else has got to go 28 times in order to make up for my sloth and shortfall.
Right.
And the average user visits Facebook a total of 40 minutes or more per day. Here again, I didn't go. Somebody else is going to spend an hour and 20 minutes to make up that average. Now let's go take this a little further. That's just Facebook. That's just one site.
Right.
Most of us are participating in multiple sites. We're tweeting. We're dealing with maybe Google Plus and other social sites. Maybe going to LinkedIn to do some professional networking. So by the time you add this up, it's incredible. One other bit of information that just blew me away, Tom, is that the average user of a cell phone in the United States spends 3 hours and 40 minutes a day on their cell phone screen. Now think about that. That's almost half of a business day spent looking just at your cell phone screen, and that's the average. So, you know.
The two things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, however.
Oh my gosh, it's just insane. And so if we're not looking in that realm, and let's face it, a lot of the people who are on their phone are looking at social networking sites. That's has to account for a significant chunk of the time. It's not just going through your email. They're looking at tweets. They're looking at Facebook. They're looking at LinkedIn and other sources. And so if we don't find a means to capture that, we are surrendering a huge opportunity as requesting parties in eDiscovery, and we are creating a huge exposure for failure and spoliation and sanctions and just general unhappiness with courts and opponents if we're not doing our job. It's a legal obligation at this point because the relevance can no longer be challenged in any meaningful way, in my opinion.
So we've got huge explosions of the data, of the source, if you will, with people spending more and more time there, but a reduction in tools. So it sounds like our friends at Social Evidence are onto something by trying to add something into the mix here as far as collection tools. But let's take it to the next step. How do we actually present this into evidence? How do we, let's say we've used a tool and we've acquired the information from these sites. What are we doing to actually authenticate these records and introduce them?
Well, that's challenging. I mean, let's put a pin in the issue of before we get to production and authentication and introduction. We have a few other hurdles to jump. But addressing your question, you need a sponsoring witness. You need somebody who says that what I see was what I saw. Faithfully duplicates what I saw when I visited that site on X date at X time.
Right.
And I haven't left anything out. I haven't added anything. This fairly and accurately represents what I saw. Or you need a defensible process, a process that by virtue of say timestamping, by virtue of hash authentication of page components and so forth, is going to allow someone who perhaps can't be a sponsoring witness to at least vouch for the process that was used to be able to make it perhaps a regular business collection process, whether it be the work of a law firm, the work of a corporation, the work of an outside eDiscovery service provider, a forensic examiner, whoever is going to have to be bringing this in and authenticating this work is going to need to have the tools behind the collection so
Sure.
They can say, you can trust this. And the reason you can trust this is because these authentication features are in place at the time of collection that makes it challenging to provide a misleading timestamp or to make alterations in the content after the fact. That's what we've done with hash values when we've been collecting content, particularly imaging hard drives for many years in the forensics business. We need something with a similar capability, and certainly that's what tools like the existing tools have done. I'm still anxious to see what social discovery is going to have. I like the fact that, as I understand it, it's going to be a virtualized tool. It's going to be a tool in the cloud. To me, it makes very little sense to have these tools be a behind the firewall tool. I mean, there are so many issues, Tom, of running it on your own machine, dealing with your own bandwidth and so forth. Putting this into the cloud where you have high bandwidth connections, where you have elastic storage as the amount of data grows and grows,
Right.
Is going to be I think a huge benefit. And the real trick here is the thing about whether it's going to work is how easy is it to use and reliable, and what is it going to cost?
Right.
Because it needs to be relatively low cost. Maybe you have to buy it a lot of times for a lot of cases. So maybe it's kind of like Starbucks. I think their coffee's kind of expensive, but anybody can afford to buy a cup of coffee there for the most part. They make their money because you come back and you buy it again and again regularly. And I think that's what the successful tool, the tool that really sticks in social discovery is going to be. It's going to be the thing that is not only affordable, but it's so affordable you can afford to use it and need to use it in every case.
Okay.
But let me backtrack for a minute.
Sure.
We're talking. We've gone from the need to have a tool to the efforts to authenticate and introduce it in proceedings. But we've done as most lawyers, I think, do, and we've overlooked the huge challenges that fall between. And that is, okay, even if you find a way to capture this content, how are you going to make it amenable to search and put it into a standard or common review platform so that we can bring review and analytics to this content with the same fluidity and ease that we bring to, say, email. And we right now have very little in that way. The tools that are out there can generate load files and can generate image files that can go into most standard platforms, but it's still very clunky in my opinion. I'm hoping that this new tool will streamline much of that and be purpose-built to facilitate not only review within the application itself, but review within the existing infrastructure of review at most law firms and corporations.
So, and I did want to ask a specific question about review. Let me ask another authentication issue, though, just before we leave. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask if you felt going to the Wayback Machine, and I'm not being facetious here, people in this field know I'm referring to a website that does in fact do some selective archiving of other websites. Is that authentication enough that I acquired the images that I wish to introduce off of the Wayback Machine?
I would say almost without exception in the context of electronic social networking, no, you are being, as you said, remiss, Tom. No, seriously, I mean, think about it, at least certainly in what we'll call modern times, the last couple of years of Facebook. Facebook requires credentials to get to the information. It is a closed system for the most part. There'll be a little bit you can get by going to someone's page, but the guts of it are going to require credentials to collect. So the Wayback Machine is not going to get into the content in a way that would be meaningful or complete. So no, sir, I would say that at best you might get a couple of photographs that are public facing, and you could at least establish that there was an account for an individual at that time. I don't think you can carry much of use beyond that. You
Right.
need credentials to do this, and I think that's important. This is a tool that is intended to be used by the side that is responsible for collecting and preserving. It's not a tool that is likely to be used by an opponent, because most opponents are not going to possess the credentials needed to expose the content.
So you mentioned review, a big problem now with any social media, of course. We're used to dealing with plain old documents, either native files or images of some sort or another that we can use a load file, the mechanism for introducing data into review databases. Very problematic with social media. And I would agree. The solution to that is going to go a long way to making this a useful tool. We've been asked.
And it's not at all a really difficult problem,
No.
certainly not with credentials. We're fortunate in that despite all the social networking aspects out there, the market still is relatively small. Once you get past Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, the demand for social, I guess I need to throw a couple of the photo sites as well. But we're really talking about a very small universe of applications that will cover most of the waterfront of responsibility. And although it will be necessary to keep up with the fairly frequent changes in the interfaces and functionality used by those tools, if that's all you have to concentrate on and it's your full-time job, I would think that that's not something we need to worry about. These tools can keep up, and these tools can be easy to use, and most importantly, it is not a terribly difficult task to be able to take this content and put it into a review platform friendly form, but it's going to require some thought. It's going to require thought about such things as, do we want advertising content that it obviously forms a very big component of these
Right.
pages to be included or excluded? Do we want the full, this is what the user saw at that very moment kind of thing, or do we want it to be more focused on participatory content, user-generated work product, as it were? Do we want it to include content that is linked from friends' pages, or do we want it only in the Facebook mode of takeout to be focused only on the account holders' contributed content? These are decisions that have to be made in terms of the scope of preservation, scope of review. They're surmountable, they're manageable decisions, but there are no standards at this point that I know of, none whatsoever. And the few cases that have come out have been, significantly unenlightening on the specifics of the process.
So you made an interesting comment, though. You mentioned pictures. One site that we haven't mentioned, but that I am seeing people use more and more as a home base, if you will, is YouTube, which of course is video based. Is that going to present any challenges, specific challenges?
I mean, yes, of course, challenges and certainly at some volume challenges as you begin to try to do significant collections from YouTube. You're talking about very large files
Right.
often in a streaming format, so they have to be streamed and reassembled.
Right.
We have bandwidth challenges out the wazoo. We haven't touched on
A
the
technical term?
of throttling. I don't know if all of our listeners know about throttling. It's not how Trump disciplines his family, by the way. Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Sorry. No, but throttling is when these sites see you're pulling down a lot of content and they turn off the tap to a certain extent. They start blocking your ability to pull information. So it's important for these tools to know how to manage throttling, know how to not to trigger a throttling
Valve.
yeah, whatever.
Right.
Know not how to alert. Sometimes you just have to pull in a more measured fashion so you don't set off the alarm bells at these sites that someone is scraping the sites for commercial content.
And that brings up a couple of the other questions that we were asked, which is how much time are people spending on this? I don't, and some budget questions were asked as well. I don't know that there are any hard and fast answers to those questions. The time, it seems to me, depends on the content you're trying to acquire and the different technical skills that may be employed to do that. Likewise, budgeting is going to be a factor of how much time is involved, and I think just has to be considered as part of the general case budget when you're starting the matter. As you mentioned, cost of this sort of a new service or new product is going to be critical to its success, and I think that kind of segues into and the last general question we were asked, which is there any usefulness in any particular practice areas? My experience is that we're seeing a lot of social media requests in family law, which is typically not a high ticket item for attorneys, and budgeting is, of course, budgeting is always important in any litigation, but in the family law arena, it seems to me you're going to be dealing with very, very budget sensitive clientele.
Well, I agree with that. I see it more frequently in the context of personal injury law and criminal law.
Okay.
In PI law, you're seeing all these cases where people are trying to get to Facebook content in particular. Purpose there is we want a picture of the plaintiff smiling or doing horseback riding or whatever they might be doing, but looking happy, looking engaged in life, anything to belie the claims that they're making of having, whether it be loss of consortium, loss of physical activity, loss of quality of life. I mean, there's always a push now. Can we find anything on Facebook? And that raises a lot of issues about how to do that. A lot of times the opponent is making a very foolish decision to demand credentials to be able to inspect the Facebook page. And I think you want to be very careful anytime you are logging in as somebody else, because it's a trap for the unwary. If I'm concerned about my Facebook content and I give you, my opposing counsel, credentials to that content, you've equipped me with the ability to say, oh, you put that there, you changed that. So you deleted that to make me look bad. You don't want that. As a lawyer, you want to be working either through trusted intermediaries on this, neutrals or what have you, or you want to be doing any reviews you do where you are being supervised. You do not have those credentials to be able to do this. I'm talking about as an opposing counsel.
Right. Understood. But I'm curious. You mentioned criminal law. Where do you see social media fitting in there?
Well, because criminals are, of course, they're all kind of really brilliant. They're such Lex Luthors that often when they will commit a crime, they will take pictures of themselves with the drugs, with the money, whatever it is, selfies at the robbery. This is insane, but that stuff tends to be posted kind of like a Native American taking coup. It tends to be posted at Facebook to demonstrate just how muy macho, and I don't say that because how powerful they are, how badass they are. I don't mean for it to be. I'm from Texas. I just use Spanish. It does not suggest anything but the fact that I'm more comfortable with Spanish idioms.
Understood. But that's interesting because I don't think in most discussions I have around social media, I haven't heard criminal law brought up a lot. But now that you say that, I do some pro bono work for the federal defenders, and there have been exact instances of what you've just described that if it had been on the radar of prosecutors back then, or if the tools had been widely available, certainly would have been a factor to be considered. So that's interesting.
There's a very important case about this out of the criminal context, the snitches get stitches case, and in that
Yes, good one.
It's a great case for looking at what kind of ancillary or circumstantial evidence may be sufficient to link content on a page to a particular actor and accused and so forth. But this is
a very little boozy.
Exactly.
That case, well, Louisiana resident, as I recall, yeah.
The boozy case is exactly the one I'm talking about.
Right. So we've talked about a lot of areas where people are going to have problems, or certainly challenges, if not problems. What advice do we give folks moving forward?
Well, they need to find a solution, Tom. First of all, you just can't say, I'm going to deal with this when the time comes. You need to have a tool set or a methodology in place, because when it happens, it'll happen quickly, and the incentive for the people to clean up their Facebook page can sometimes be overwhelming. So you're going to want to be able, not only as a requesting party, to make a demand upon an opponent to preserve social networking content, but considering the level of ignorance out there and the lack of familiarity with good tools and good practices, you may have to provide almost an instruction manual as to what it is you expect your opponent to do. I cannot emphasize enough, not having seen this tool, social discovery, that not only does it have to be relatively inexpensive, but it has to be dead simple. I mean, it's got to be one of those things where if I've got the credentials, I can tell it the scope I want, time or what have you, if it's going to have any kind of textual filters built in, what I want in terms of components of the page and what the searches will be, and to make sure that that gets going fast and really fast. And so it's got to be dead simple so that anybody can log in 24 hours a day, give it the information it needs to begin the collection process. It's going to have a really good way to monitor that process, and importantly, what I would call exception processing, good exception reporting.
Right.
What did it not get? What is not being revealed? What is sort of in the dark web area that it can't get to? It's got to know not only what it got, but it has to know what it was unable to get.
Right. Yeah. Just one, and this is of course a problem with any new products. My notes indicate the product is called Social Evidence.
Sorry.
I could be wrong, and certainly shows the importance not just of having a simple, easy to use tool, but a good marketing program so that people like us get the name of the product right. I like you, I'm eagerly looking forward to another tool that I hope will be easy to use. I love the fact of, as you said, the web availability, so that not that lawyers ever work strange hours, but the ability to go in at any time as the need immediately arises and perform some searches or some grabs as it's needed. I just see more and more of this going on, and certainly no sign that things are going to lighten up or lessen up. I think we're going to have more and more evidence or potential evidence, as you said at the onset, out there on the web, and so easier tools and to acquire that evidence are going to be absolutely essential. Any closing thoughts? Again, I'm hoping we'll be asked to take a look at the product when it's ready for beta, and we can talk about some specific features at some point.
Well, I guess, like you said, I would love to see it so I can really, kick the tires, as it were. If it's going to be calling itself social evidence, it needs to be purpose built to support authentication, to make it clear that information hasn't been left out, to make it difficult through, let's say, through use of integral hashing capabilities, to make it difficult or impossible to make alterations to the content after the fact. But by the same token, Tom, in the context of discovery, it's going to have to lend itself to the ability to redact the information, whether intrinsically in the program or that the data that is handed off to review platforms will lend itself to redaction. So we got to think all the phases through. That was some of the problems I had when I looked at some of the products in the marketplace. This is a perfect opportunity. There's no better place to put a social networking content collection tool than as a cloud-based tool. So it's in the right place. It's certainly the right time. It's all going to be about the cost and the execution and the ease of use. So I'm really anxious to take a look at this tool when it emerges. I'm excited. I imagine anybody who's had to work with the limited range of tools out there is going to be pretty happy to see a newcomer to the space.
Right. Well, great. Thanks so much for your time, as always, and I look forward to having another discussion on this subject with the tool in our hands, so we can really play around with it.
Yeah, I hope we get a chance to be able to do sort of do a demo. You and I.
Yep.
I'll download my Facebook and you can download yours. And
well, oh no, I'm not agreeing to that at all.
Well, it's the only credentials I have are from my own site.
We'll burn that bridge when we come to it. Thanks
Always
again,
good to
Craig.
talk to you, Tom. Take care.
You bet.